Well, I thought I would just talk a little bit about my previous two books to give some context, and then talk briefly about my current book, and then open it up to any questions you guys might have. And basically what I like to do is I like to really immerse myself in my topics, just dive right in and try to live them. So my first book was called The Know-It-All, and this was about reading the Encyclopedia Britannica from A to Z. And this one came about because I felt that my IQ was dropping about 1 point every year that I was out of college, and I felt something drastic needed to be done. So I got the idea from my dad, who started to read the encyclopedia when I was a kid, but he only made it up to the middle of the letter B. So he didn't get very far. He's around boomerang, and he's like, that's enough. And I decided to finish what he began and restore our family's name, remove this black spot. So that's what I did. And it was actually a much, much larger enterprise than I imagined. I mean, it is a long book. It's 44 million words and 33,000 pages. As I say in the book, if you stack up the volumes, it's about 4'8", so it's a Danny DeVito of knowledge. And it was incredibly difficult, but fascinating, and I learned so much, and I actually became perhaps too enthusiastic with what I learned, so I wanted to share it with everyone. And my wife started to fine me $1 for every irrelevant fact that I inserted into conversation. So see, it sounds like your wife has a similar problem. And I picked up a tremendous amount of information, much of which I've forgotten. But I have found that if you throw enough at the wall, some of it is going to stick. So I still have a lot in there. And unfortunately, I have a lot that I want to forget. That I would be happy not to know that opossums have 13 nipples. I would like to get that. Rene Descartes had a fetish for cross-eyed women. That's in there forever, and I can't get it out. But in addition to that, I learned so much that changed my life for the better, and it really did turn out to be a life-affirming experience. And I'll just give you 2 quick examples of how it changed my life for the better. The first is that I thought that after reading the encyclopedia, I would never want to read another book. That would be it. But actually it had the opposite effect. It really whetted my appetite and made me more curious and more eager to read books. I would read in the letter W about Victoria Woodhull. She was just one of hundreds of amazing people. She was, I don't know if you've heard of her, she's a 19th century feminist, a pioneer of the feminism movement. She was the first woman to run for president. She was the first female stockbroker. And also she was a renowned psychic, which I thought was an excellent combination, a psychic stockbroker. Who wouldn't want that? And the second thing that I wanted to mention was that after reading the encyclopedia, all the thousands of years of human history, I did come away more optimistic. Because you read about the highs and the lows, and the highs are incredibly high, and the lows are incredibly low. But overall, I think that it became clear that progress is real. That we, as horrible as the 20th century was, and parts of the 21st century, as horrible as it was, compared to where we were 5,000, 10,000 years ago, we are so much better off. I mean, 10,000 years ago, the chances of being killed by another human being were the chances that you would be killed by another human being were 1 in 3. And so this was, even with the genocide and the world wars of the 20th century, we have made amazing strides. So it made me more optimistic that we would, continue this. And I loved it. So I loved the experience, and I said, I want to do this again. And the only book that I thought would rival the encyclopedia in its impact was the Bible. So this was my second project, The Year of Living Biblically. And this one came about because I grew up with no religion at all. As I say in the book, I'm Jewish in the same way the Olive Garden is Italian. So, not very. But I became increasingly interested in religion, and I wanted to know what to teach my son. I have a young son. So I decided I'm going to learn about the Bible. And one way to learn about it was to live it, to really just try to follow what it said. So that's what I did. I read the Bible, which I had never done, and I wrote down every rule that I could find in the Bible, every piece of advice. And this turned out to be a very long list, hundreds of rules. And I wanted to follow them all without picking and choosing, because I wanted to see how this would affect my life. So I wanted to follow the famous ones, like love your neighbor, the 10 Commandments, and be fruitful and multiply. And by the way, I was fruitful and multiplied during my biblical year. I had twin boys, so I take my projects very seriously. But in addition to the famous ones, I wanted to follow the lesser-known rules. The Bible says that you cannot shave the corners of your beard. And I didn't know where the corners were. So I just let the whole thing grow. And by the end, I looked, it was down to here, and I spent a lot of time at airport security in trying to prove what I looked like. The Bible says that you cannot wear clothes made of mixed fibers. And it seems so strange to me. Why? It's like micromanaging. Why would God care if I wore a poly-cotton blend? But I decided there's no way for me to know the meaning of this rule, if there is any meaning, unless I try it. So I got rid of my poly-cotton clothes. The Bible says to stone adulterers. So I thought I would give that a shot. And I'll just very briefly tell you, I was able to stone one adulterer. I was in Central Park, and I was wearing my biblical robes and sandals, because at this point, this was later in the year, I was really trying to get into character. So I had on my outfit, and a man came up to me and said, "Why are you dressed like this?" And I explained to him, I'm trying to follow the Bible from the 10 Commandments right on down to stoning adulterers. And he says, "Well, I'm an adulterer. Are you going to stone me?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that'd be great." I was so excited to the altar. So I took out a handful of stones that I had been carrying around for this occasion. And he actually, they were small stones, he grabbed them out of my hand and threw them at my face. So he was a very aggressive adulterer. And I felt it was an eye for an eye. I could throw one back at him. So this is the way I stoned an adulterer. And it was an odd experience, for sure. But it also allowed me to grapple with some of the big issues that I wanted to think about during this year, which included, how can the Bible be so wise and compassionate and relevant in some parts, and yet so seemingly barbaric in others, and talk about stoning adulterers and stoning homosexuals. So I got to talk to people about this, really explore it, and that's what I loved about the year. It did change my life, even more than the encyclopedia book. I took away so many lessons that I have kept with me. I'll just give you one example, and that is, it really changed my views on gratitude. Because during my year, the Bible says that you have to say prayers of thanksgiving. So I was saying these prayers of thanksgiving. And I was getting carried away. I was saying prayers of thanksgiving for everything. I'd press the elevator button, and I'd be thankful the elevator came. I would get in the elevator, I'd be thankful that it didn't plummet to the basement. And it was a weird way to live, but But there was something wonderful about it, because you start to realize there are hundreds of things that go right every day that we completely take for granted. And we focus on the 3 or 4 that go wrong. So this was a radical shift, and I've tried to keep it. It's hard, it's a battle, because my mind does gravitate to the negative. But it's something that has changed my life in such a profound way. And after that, after the Bible experience, I realized this is kind of an interesting way to live, to try to do these experiments, and that they do improve your life. They can be a pain in the butt, but they're fascinating and they improve your life, and it's a great way to get out of your rut. So I decided that I would try to write an entire book where I would write about several different experiments that I would try on my life. So that is the new book, The Guinea Pig Diaries. It's a series of these experiments that I did on myself to try to make my life better. And I'll just talk about 3 and then open it up to any questions that you might have. One of the first ones that I did was an experiment called My Outsourced Life. And for this one, I hired a team of people in Bangalore, India, to do everything for me. So they answered my email, and they answered my phone. They argued with my wife for me. They read bedtime stories to my son. So this is the greatest month of my life, because I just sat back and read books and watched movies. And they are actually better at arguing with my wife than I was. So it turned out that it was a vast improvement. So this was one of the greatest months. On the other end of the spectrum was an experiment I did about a movement called radical honesty. And this is a movement started by a psychologist in Virginia, and he believes that you should never lie, ever. But more than that, whatever's on your brain should come out of your mouth. There should be no filter. So I tried this for a month. This was the worst month of my life. This I do not recommend. This is basically the invention of lying. There's a new movie, this is sort of the real life version of it. And it was horrible. I'd be in a restaurant and we'd run into some old friends of my wife's, and they would say, "Oh, we should all get together." And I would have to say what was on my mind, which is, "No thanks. You seem nice, but I have no interest in seeing you again." And they would shockingly be offended, and they walked out, and my wife was furious. So it definitely has some huge downsides, radical honesty. But it was also, I will say, in fairness, there are things about radical honesty that are great. And, it's incredibly liberating. You don't have to try to remember the lies that you told. It was interesting to see how much energy I spent every day on trying to remember what I told different people. I also believe that we can practice something I call sustainable radical honesty. So I don't think we should all be radically honest, or we have no man. The guy who founded it, by the way, has been married 5 times. So yeah, you need it in marriage, you need it in business, you need some lies, but we can all be a lot more honest. One thing is that we can be radically positively honest. This was one thing the psychologist talks about. It doesn't have to be brutal honesty. It can be, during this month I called up one of my first editors at a tiny newspaper in California and told him how much his mentorship meant to me. And he thought, he's a little freaked out, but it was, it was very touching, and I think he appreciated it in the end. And so I do think we can be more open in that way. And one I'll just mention very quickly is relates to Tom's work. I tried to do something another experiment where I refused to multitask for a month, or at least tried. I failed. I multitask all the time, but I tried to be a unitasker, where I only did one thing at a time. And this came about because of driving. I was multitasking while I was driving. I was listening to the Albert Einstein biography by Walter Isaacson, a wonderful thing. So I was listening to an audio, book on tape, and I was so interested in it, I kind of forgot about the road. And I jumped the highway median into oncoming traffic, and no one was hurt, thank God. But it really gave me a sense that multitasking really is incredibly dangerous. So now I'm not allowed to drive. My wife makes me sit in the back with the kids. But I also love this month of multitasking because it also changed the way my brain was wired. I don't think that we realize how much multitasking has affected the way we think. So this was an amazing month for me. I'll just end by telling you the final experiment in the book, which is actually suggested by readers. Readers who have read my first two books send me suggestions on things I should do, which I love. A lot of them, by the way, tell me that I should do all the positions in the Kama Sutra, which my wife Julie put the kibosh on that one. Which is okay by me, actually, because I think it would be, I'm not limber enough. But one of them they suggested was that I follow my wife's every command for the entire month. They came up with the title WHIP. That was the idea. And I should do this because I have put her through quite a bit. She is quite patient. To give you, during the Bible year, the Bible says that you cannot touch women while they're menstruating. But if you take it really literally, Leviticus says that you cannot sit on a seat where a menstruating woman has sat, because then the seat is impure. So my wife found that offensive, and she sat in every seat in our car while she was in her lonely home. So I had to stand for it. But anyway, this last one was about following her every command, and it was it was horrible. Because she got drunk with power. She was we'd be watching TV, and she'd be on the couch. She'd say, can you change the channel? And I'd say, sure, but you have the remote control right there. And she would say, well, yeah, I know, but I want you to get up. That's the kind of thing that I was dealing with. But overall, it was an amazing month and eye-opening. When we wrote down all of the things we do around the house, it was really kind of shocking. I thought, for instance, those liquid soap dispensers, I thought they just refilled by themselves. I thought they were self-filling, but apparently not. And now I have to do them. So it has definitely changed the work of the... And reading about the statistics on marriage, it really is shocking that we still have this 19th century structure for the division of labor within a marriage, even though in so many families we have both spouses working full-time. And even in families where both spouses work full-time, the women are still doing on average 2.5 times the housework and 5 times the child care. So, I unfortunately, for my life, have now, I'm trying to get to 50-50. I think it's horrible for my life, but it's great for our marriage. So, you gotta balance those things. And so I loved doing all these experiments, and they all did change my life for the better in some way. And I'll just end with a quote that I'm sort of in the middle of a book tour right now, and at the very first signing, a woman asked me to write this quote from my first book, which I actually didn't come up with, so I can't take credit for it. But it was a quote by Ian Fleming, who wrote the James Bond novels, but he also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And his quote was that you should never say no to adventure. Otherwise, you'll lead a very dull life. And that, I thought, was such a beautiful sentiment and so captured my philosophy of life that I thought I would end with that. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, next. I have one more self-improvement experiment in me, and that one is that I feel I did the mind with the encyclopedia and the spirit with the Bible. So this one I'm trying to change my body. I'm trying to be the healthiest person alive. So that is why I had my glass of red wine, and I did, no offense to this delightful, delicious restaurant, but I didn't have a lot of the Indian food because I'm on a very strict diet. So I can only eat, like avocados and carrots and things like that. So that's my final experiment. Yes?
Tell me about the diet, because it's pretty eating white rice.
Oh, I know. Oh, that was terrible. Yes, I was eating white rice. Thank you for busting me. Well, it's interesting. I mean, one of the interesting things about doing this is you can find studies to rationalize any behavior you want. So, red wine, lots of studies to say that's okay. Chocolate, huge number of antioxidants in chocolate, so that's okay as long as it's incredibly dark chocolate. So I do have some moments of pleasure in there. I mean, the basic idea is, as you might have read in any of the Michael Pollan books or any of those books, really it is all about whole foods and not anything with more than 5 ingredients. I try to stay away from. So that can, dark foods. Love the dark foods. The darker the better. So those are just some of the tips I think. Yes.
After the year of religious week, did you how have you seen the Bible before that? And would you ever want to read that to your children? Would you ever want to go back and read passages of it? Is it your favorite book of yours now?
The Bible?
Yeah.
It is. Well, it definitely changed the way I'm going to raise my kids because after the book we did end up joining a synagogue, and it's a Reformed synagogue, and we never go. But so you gotta take the good with the bad. But we decided to send our kids to Jewish school, and because I do want to give them exposure to our religion and our faith, because I don't really care if they become atheists, if they become observant, whatever they are, as long as they're good people, as long as they're mentioned, I'll be happy. But I wanted to give them a foundation, so they would have a little place of knowledge, so to be able to choose from a place of knowledge. So that's what we decided after the year. And I think I would talk to them about the Bible, and I would also tell them that it's not the Bible, that the Bible is a complicated book, and there are a lot of parts that they don't teach in Sunday school, and that we have to be aware of that, and we have to choose the right parts, that it's our responsibility to choose what parts of the Bible that we should follow. And there are people who call this cafeteria religion, and they say that's, you're just picking parts that you like. And I say that, yeah, that's true. But what's wrong with cafeterias? I've had some delicious meals at cafeterias. So because you can find in the Bible wonderful parts about compassion and tolerance, but you can also find incredible misogyny, homophobia, even rationalizations for genocide. There is really some horrible stuff in the Bible, and I think it's absolutely fine to ignore and focus on finding the good stuff. Yes?
Back to radical honesty. The psychologist he was also a politician, right?
That is true.
And
Yes.
he actually won in the primary, and then he lost in the general election because of his radical honesty, because in addition to having 5 wives, he was also quite open with his sexual proclivities and was a bisexual, and when he announced this to his constituents, that's when things kind of imploded out of him.
That's it. Had you read about him before?
He was featured in This American Life, one of the segments they did.
Right, I heard about that.
Yeah, and it was really quite amusing.
Yeah, he's amazing. Brad Blanton is his name, and he did run. He's incredible. You know, he's very far to the left, and he ran for Congress in Virginia. And the first time he ran, he got 25% of the vote because the only campaigning he did was a 5-minute infomercial about how how horrible government was, and he was going to be the only politician to tell the truth all the time. So that was the first time he did great. Then he ran again, and he decided this time he was going to talk more and go out and meet the constituents. And when they met him, and they started trying to get to know him, and he started insulting them and talking about his nude workshops that he holds. That's when the 25% shrunk to 0.5%. So yeah, sometimes it's better, less is more.
Did you explain to people what you were doing, and how long did it take you to repair? Or did you?
Yeah, no, I definitely. Well, sometimes I didn't have time to explain because there's no filter. So by the time I got around to explaining, it was too late. But yeah, there was certainly quite a bit of reparations to be done. There were lots of apology notes and letters, and yeah, it was. I mean, one of the problems is that men, as you might have read in Cosmopolitan, men do think about sex quite a bit. So if you are being radical, I'll put it this way: there's a fine line between radical honesty and creepiness. Unfortunately, I kind of crossed that line a couple of times. So there were definitely apologies to be made. So, yeah.
DeLaune will be disappointed that I don't say something, but I'm coming back to your current book. Some doctors, including Dr. Oz, advocate the more sex you have, the longer you live. You're going to pursue that?
It's true. That was actually, I had, Dr. Oz. Dr. Oz is sort of on Oprah. Now he has his own show. He says that you should have sex every day. And again, my wife put the kibosh on that. I have 3 young kids. So that is not going to be happening. But, I thought it was a good excuse. But, no, it didn't go over. I'm sorry.
My father was infected with attack. Covered from the 80s when he finished, he was all the
That is great. Yeah, I have had people who say to me there's this very small club of people who are encyclopedia readers, and it's a strange group. That took me a year and a half. I read about 6 hours a day, and I read wherever I could, in the subway, which was a little odd, Yeah.
All of your things experiments, was there any one that was a favorite of yours that you felt that you learned the most from?
I learned there were several that I really loved. One was that I tried to follow the 110 rules of life that George Washington wrote when he was a young man. And I didn't even know about this, but he wrote out this sort of list of advice. And it's an amazing list. There's so many wonderful ideas in there about self-restraint and self-sacrifice and respect for others. and also not adjusting your crotch in public. That is literally rule number 2 in George Washington's rule. And rule number 11. It was so important that you wanted to repeat it. And that's a big problem. So anyway, but I love doing that because I learned a lot about, civility and just a couple of weeks ago there was this whole news cycle about the breakdown in civility with Kanye West and Joe Wilson, they were being radically honest, by the way. They were probably, they were on, they were Brand Blanton's followers. But anyway, it was an amazing, I loved that month, and that definitely changed the way I acted. One more, or is that good? Anyone else?
Yeah, Jackie, right here.
Yeah.
Do you have a sequel plan for that model?
Oh, well, the health one. Not for that model, but the health one will be my next one. So, but I have done a couple of experiments since then. The most recent was in Esquire magazine, and it was called "Do I Love My Wife? An Investigative Report." And I went inside an MRI, functional MRI machine, where they take movies of your brain. As they showed me pictures of my wife, and I had to think about my wife, and then also as they showed me pictures of Angelina Jolie, so started to see the difference there, and it was very interesting. I do love my wife, it turns out, 66%. After 10 years of marriage, it's not bad. So I feel pretty good about that. Okay. Well, the idea of these functional MRIs is that, they're like X-rays into your brain. They will tell you the truth that even you don't know. So that they're really fascinating and kind of scary. And I don't think they're totally accurate yet, but I think they're going to get more and more accurate. So I think, I actually think it would have been more useful if I were a single man and I was deciding between two women, going into the MRI machine to see what I really thought about these women. But I'll leave that to someone else. Well, thank you so much.